Hey everybody, it's Eric Torenberg, co-founder, partner of Village Global, a network-driven venture firm. And this is Venture Stories, a podcast covering topics relating to tech and business with world-leading experts.
We were just talking earlier, many of you are Village CEOs, and Jerry is an indirect investor in your company already. So he's thrilled to see the fruits of his investment, and we're really thrilled to have you involved in the Village Global Network.
Thank you. It's very impressive. I would say that I was skeptical of the Village model, but it's actually pretty impressive and incredible. How long have you been at it?
We've been at it for almost 2 years.
Yeah. Time flies.
Yeah, still early days.
Yeah, for sure.
Now, 1994, many years ago, you and David Philo are classmates at Stanford.
So how many of you were not born in 1994?
Don't answer that question.
Yeah.
So you and David Philo are classmates at Stanford, and you come up with the idea for Yahoo. What was the initial vision on day one?
I would say that I was just texting with David this morning, and texting with David just reminded me of why we were able to start Yahoo and why we were able to be successful in the early days, because David is the biggest procrastinator you'll ever meet. And he will go out of his way, being a genius, to figure out ways to procrastinate. So he's so creative at procrastinating. And so I think the advent of this is when Mark Andreessen had just in University of Urbana designed the server and the browser, which unified as a protocol the internet. Before then it was you have to know all the different protocols, and the hyperlink. And so this was, I think, 2 or 3 years after Tim Berners-Lee came up with the web protocol. So this was all really
invented the internet.
Well, invented the web.
Okay.
And which is coming up on its 30th year. So it was one of those times where you had the server and you had the browser and you have these links that you can click on, hyperlinks, and then all of a sudden people who are not techie are able to publish. And you can publish once, put it on the server, and every browser, as long as it conforms to the protocol, can see it. So there was this just massive explosion of really, really, really bad content, right? I mean, if I had to watch another Madonna website, whatever, but it was, usually a very geeky academic department within university, the physics department of the University of Manchester or whatever. So in our pursuit of procrastination, we figured out that, hey, we could serve the web, and we could figure out, what are crazy content that comes out every day. And David, in his pursuit of creatively procrastinating, started putting it in a database and categorized it and started making it searchable. And I was the guy that says, well, hey, instead of keeping this database to ourselves, why don't we publish a website that exposes to the outside world? And that's kind of how it got going, was this guide to the web. And in fact, many of you who are that old will remember it was called David and Jerry's Guide to the Web, the World Wide Web. And had we kept that name, I probably wouldn't be speaking to you today. So.
And you came up with the name Yahoo, and then later came up with what it stands for. Is that right?
Yeah. This was, 1994. I think by the end of 1994, we were the biggest website in the world. And what had happened, unbeknownst to us, was we created a kind of it's a directory, but basically people wanted to get listed. And so it became this interactive directory where people said, hey, I went down, sports, entertainment, sports, sumo wrestling, and then I didn't see my website. Here it is, right? And so we were getting just bombarded with requests, and we wrote software to help with it. But ultimately, it became this two of us trying to keep up with people submitting websites, and and I can't exactly remember why, but I was the guy that was doing all the interfacing with people submitting. And so that became a chore to the extent where every time we had to refer to our name as Jerry Davis Guide to the World Wide Web, even just figuring out typing it out was like, crazy, right? So
was the URL David and Jerry's Guide to the World Wide Web?
It was, what was it?
Was it Akebono?
No, it was Akebono. That was the server.
In any case, you decided Yahoo was the better name.
Yeah. Well, so one night we said, look, we have to change the name, and because we can't, and David hated the fact that his name was even on the thing. So he's from Louisiana, and he claimed that he was called Yahoo all his life. So so that was and if you look up in the dictionary, Yahoo means somebody who's very uncivilized, rude, and that kind of described us to a T. So,
and as rumor goes, you and David are, because this is a legendary story of the history of Silicon Valley, you and David are sharing a sleeping bag at the office. Is that true?
We didn't share sleeping bags.
Two sleeping bags.
There were no body fluids shared. There was nothing. That would be disgusting to share that with David.
But you slept at the office with David.
Yeah, so we would have to take turns, and that was kind of the
You mean take turns like 24/7? You were.
Yeah, I would sleep, he would work, and vice versa. And that was, I think, either one of our girlfriends or both of our girlfriends put their foot down and said, this isn't going to work. And but the reality was also we were just taking on so much bandwidth in this little corner of Stanford, and our sysadmin came one day and says, guys, I can't hide you any longer. People are wondering what the hell is all this bandwidth going. And so we knew we had to leave. We didn't know what to do with it. We didn't think it was a business. We were, some of you may have heard this, but we were writing business plans to do everything else other than Yahoo as a business. And so I guess it was kind of the best business was under our noses the whole time. But so when we were forced to leave campus, we started thinking about how do we keep it going while we figured out a new business to start.
Village and AME Cloud Ventures were not around then.
No.
So you had to pitch a lesser venture capital.
Yeah. I mean,
and the historical account is that Sequoia invested $1 million for 25% of Yahoo.
Right. Yeah. So I'll bet you none of you guys are even that close to that valuation anymore.
So talk us through. You pitched a bunch of VCs, or you just pitched Sequoia and they said yes on the spot, or how did it work?
I think revisionist history is always powerful, but let's see. I think, we had one of those old answering machines that had tapes in it, and so I remember we started, once word got out that Yahoo was looking for a home, our answering machine started filling up, and I remember playing one time, there were two corporates, I think MCI and AOL, and then Netscape, which was a big part of our story. And then there were a few VCs, and I can't remember how many we started with. People come up to me now and says, "Hey, you came and pitched me in 1994," and I can't, maybe I did, maybe I can't really remember. But we came down to three final ones. It was Tim Draper, and it was Vinod at Kleiner, and then it was Mike at Sequoia. And we had corporate interest, and so we were in DC meeting with AOL and MCI, and on the way back from the airport, we were like, man, people are talking about giving us $4 million to buy this thing. This is more money than we've ever seen, and I think Moritz said, look, we can't buy you, but we'll invest in you at that valuation.
So $3 million pre, $1 million investment.
Right. So so you essentially own the same amount or a little bit less, but you get to try to build it, and that was it. And
so you raised money from professional VCs, and how long after until you hired a professional CEO?
What's amazing about our journey, and I should have prefaced all this by saying I'm one of the luckiest people you ever meet, because I was lucky enough to start Yahoo. I was lucky enough to as part of Yahoo's journey, start Yahoo Japan with Masa, and then meet Jack, and now I'm very fortunate to have a lot of great entrepreneurs in our portfolio. But the lucky part is that if you now I've been doing this investment stuff for 7 years. If David File and Jerry Yang showed up in my office, there's zero chance I would give them money, right? They were, two PhDs with no entrepreneurial experience. They were extremely competitive environment, and people probably don't remember, but there were 4 or 5 other companies that were trying to do the exact same thing. There was no IP protecting what we did. There was no technology per se, and that there's no business model. So why the hell would you fund?
What did Mike Moritz
do? So this is the question I keep asking Mike. I says, what do but now some of it is a little bit of tongue in cheek, but I think we did have the largest website, and it was growing like crazy, right? But part of the funding agreement, and Mike was good enough to make it our idea, which is, we need some adult supervision. Partly because we felt like we were in such a competitive environment. We were competing with very experienced entrepreneurs, Steve Kirsch at InfoSeek, and Lycos. I don't know if Bob Davis went there yet, but clearly they were all very well-known entrepreneurs at the time. So while we had a lot of good instincts, we felt like we couldn't learn on the job to try to also grow and run a company. So
the modern take on founders as CEOs is the founder should stay the CEO as long as they can. There are some venture firms that will not back a company if the founder is no longer the CEO. Whereas I think when you were starting Yahoo, it really was pretty standard practice to replace the founder.
I don't know. I mean, I think we've gone through waves, right? I mean, obviously us, Google to some respect with Eric. But then when Zuck came, it was sort of the strong, call it the strong silent type. But I don't, I hate to say it, I mean, there are terrific founder CEOs that have stood, the test of time, and then there are plenty of companies where our VC friends are replacing the founder with a CEO. So I don't know if it's a rule of thumb at all, other than both could work and both could not work. And I do think people tend to glorify and identify the founder CEO, and I think for good reasons, right? Usually, if you have the right drive and passion, that tends to deliver more success. In our case, I would say that finding the right CEO was extremely important because, and Tim Kugel was kind of a throwback. He was not a traditional business guy. He didn't come in with any preconceived notions. He guided and steered us rather than, pushed us. And so I would say that, and we went on the land grab immediately. And so it never felt like we were being supervised. We were really part of a team with Jeff Mallett and Zod. And so I suppose we were very lucky to have found a team that actually, that actually were all rowing towards the same direction without having it slow down. We've seen the other way, which, you bring in management and professional people with preconceived notions and you kill the spirit of the company.
Just picking up on that thread around the team, the diaspora and the alumni of Yahoo is legendary, from the founders of WhatsApp to modern execs like Jeff Weiner and Dan Rosenzweig. What do you think, in the early days, were you setting a culture or a DNA to attract these sorts of people, or were you looking for certain qualities that you think generated so many unbelievably talented execs and founders that came out?
Well, I think they make us look good. But I would say that even from very early on, it was very competitive to hire great people. And there's only so much, free lunch and foosball tables and money can buy, right? So we had to create a culture that is borderline, cult religion. And I think all strong founders have an element of being able to evangelize and sort of advocate a line of religion. And so I think culturally we wanted this we wanted this more team approach. We wanted this more collaborative approach. I remember we would favor people who played better on the team rather than a sort of a loner individual superstar. So it was a conscious set of choices for this culture that we were hoping would be our competitive advantage, and I think it lasted for a little while, probably, certainly 10 years, probably.
So maybe jumping forward a bit in the history of Yahoo.
Yeah.
So it starts, you're sleeping in a sleeping bag at the office. Some years later, an iconic photo emerges of Jerry Yang at the Allen & Coast and Valley Conference, surrounded by Larry Page and Sergey Brin with an animated discussion, allegedly debating Microsoft's $45 billion acquisition offer of Yahoo, which has been analyzed and recounted from lots of different angles. Could you walk us through the decision-making process and how you thought about that moment and the agony and the pain?
Well, I would say...
were you CEO at the time?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So, I would say a couple things. One is that once you're CEO, your responsibility is to the shareholders, right? So there's a lot of, Monday morning quarterbacking on could-have, should-haves. But and I'm not saying this because now I'm a shareholder of a lot of companies, but I would say that as CEO with my board, I think our responsibility was to figure out if you can get a deal done. So the challenge was that when we realized you couldn't get a deal done because they didn't want to do it anymore, then you have to save the company. You have to save the company by telling the employees that, how do you have to stick around and things like that. So it was a tricky situation only because they made a public offer and then they backed out of it, right? It was convenient to say, hey, the founder CEO, Jerry Yang, didn't want to do a deal. And I can't negate that in the public thing because I want my employees who want to stick around to say, hey, we didn't do a deal, so we got to keep moving forward. But it was interesting because it was difficult to get a deal done for a couple of reasons. And the third, the last reason, which I'll say is probably the ultimate, but it was getting weird when we were talking about getting through the Justice Department, the antitrust issue. So that's always a key thing in any big takeovers like this. And I won't get into the details of that, but it was clear that they were not ready to go after, because this was a while, but this is about 10 years after the Microsoft consent decree with the Justice Department. So they were not ready to push for a deal if they ran into any trouble. That was kind of weird. The second one was Steve, which we still laugh about. Steve Ballmer, that we still laugh about this day, is he wanted to value our Asian asset at zero. So in our...
Is this pre the Alibaba deal?
No, we had 40% of Alibaba. So in retrospect, we can all... Right, so but it was a very difficult conversation to say, hey, we want to pay $40 billion for Yahoo, but we value Asian asset at zero. And
so Alibaba's market cap now is almost $400 billion. What was it at that time?
Yeah, I don't know.
I mean, was it clearly an unbelievable position to hold at the time?
Well, I don't know. I would say this was 2008, right? So no, it was not clear. But this is Yahoo Japan and Yahoo and Alibaba, and so we're like, that's just negotiating, but whatever. And the third, I think, was, and maybe this was Bill Gates or maybe it was Steve, but when kind of April of 2008 rolled around, they saw the economy tanking, right? And to me, that was sort of the final straw. It was just like there was no way they were going to go through an antitrust period, and Now, I don't think they knew whether it was, Lehman Brothers was going to happen in September or whatever. But it's clear they're sort of seeing the economy doing one of these things. And so once they backed out, I think it was very difficult to, it's one of those things where everybody goes back to their corners and everybody has to say what is convenient for them.
Picking up another thread on another significant deal in Yahoo's history, the SoftBank deal and Yahoo Japan.
Yeah.
You work closely with Masa,
right?
And who's now enjoying a resurgence of influence in the Valley today. Separate from the Yahoo deal, just stepping back.
How many of you guys have SoftBank investments?
Too early
Nobody
stage.
Yet?
Too early stage.
One?
At his former company.
Oh,
yes.
that doesn't count. The only thing I've said to Masa is you can't mark up your own investment.
But that's happening.
You can't do like a second round on top of your first round, So count it as IRR.
So help us understand the psychology of Masa and what's your take on the SoftBank effect for the Valley?
It's very easy for Valley firms and institutions to be cynical about Masa. But if you sit down with Masa and you listen to what he's trying to do, it's a very powerful vision. He has had the opportunity of participating in what he calls platform companies for 20 years, and now he believes this is the era, right, with AI and everything else, that he believes that if he can take stakes in companies of the future and then quote-unquote platform companies and then help them work with each other in a way that is more active in a entrepreneur-friendly way than passive, as most institutions are, he thinks he can create tremendous value. And Masa puts his money where his mouth is. And
has he invested in any AME Cloud Ventures companies?
Yes.
At reasonable valuation?
At very reasonable valuation.
Excellent.
But it's not just him, right? He's obviously has an army of investors now. So,
although allegedly every founder has to go to Tokyo and meet with Masa in person before a deal gets done, no matter who else on the team is.
Some people have Skyped in, I know, but
so maybe a third. So we've talked about the Microsoft deal and the Yahoo Japan deal. Maybe the deal that you're now most famous for cutting, called the most lucrative tech bet of all time, is the Alibaba investment.
Right.
So give us the snapshot of how that came to be and any lessons or reflections from it.
It's very interesting given what's happening now with the U.S. and China to think back in sort of late 90s when we were taught, we grew up in the world of globalization, right? And if you produce the best product, you could sell it to the world, which may not be true anymore, unfortunately, in our world. But I think the way that we were all encouraged to go and think about China was through engagement, right? If we were able to help drive their middle class to be 500 million people, 800 million people, then they're going to get more freedom, and therefore this idea of economic opening up and allowing them to into the Western world, so to speak, was sort of the mandate. And so, and Jiang Zemin was probably the prototypical president that in looking back, that president that really opened to the West. And so I remember, they had a very active effort to court technology companies from the U.S. They had a very active effort to court entrepreneurs because they wanted to grow an entrepreneurial sector. And I went in 1997 for the first time to go to China's, I think it was a Fortune conference or something. And the Ministry of Foreign Trade and Economic Cooperation, MOFTEC, has sent one of their middle. It was an official, but it was basically somebody that worked in the ministry to be my tour guide because he spoke English, and that person was Jack, right? And so
Jack Ma.
Jack Ma, and so we, he took me to the Great Wall. We went to sightseeing and all these places, and of course he was very this is between his startups. He had failed, and then he went to the ministry for a while, and then he left the ministry to go back to Hangzhou and started Taobao. So he was very inquisitive and obviously interested in what the internet is doing, and then we lost touch. But you know, the Yahoo story in China was basically we were trying to build Yahoo China like we had done in Japan, which was very successful. But we soon realized that the government wasn't going to let us do everything we wanted to do. In fact, the government wasn't going to let us do anything we wanted to do. And so on our way out, the government basically nicely says, hey, you know, if you guys keep sticking around, we might have regulations that are still in drafting form, but it may come out and make what you're doing illegal. So, okay.
But have a great trip home.
So have a great trip home. And Jerry, you're the pride of all the Chinese people around the world. Okay. So I'm like walking out of the meeting. I said to Terry Summel at the time, like, we got to get the heck out of China. And this is when we embarked on the strategy of trying to figure out how do we take what we have in China and make it into, you know, an investment or a stake with, you know, kind of a leader in the business. And
so you do what any person would naturally do, which is call your tour guide.
Yeah, right. No, but obviously and so we were competing in China on e-commerce. Like you know, Yahoo Japan had a very strong, I think to this day has a very strong commerce business. And so our biggest competitor in China in the commerce was this company called Taobao. And we're like, who the hell is behind Taobao? And sure enough, it was Jack. And so we rekindled our romance, and the rest is history. But it was this idea of, you know, on the way out, on the retreat, right? Trying to leave our, trying to create some value by leaving our assets and our money with who we hope is an industry leader. And we figured, you know, there's not a lot of sophistication. We basically found a guy, you know, and by this point, Masa had already invested. So Masa he will tell you he's the best investor in the world. And it's true.
So Masa had already invested in Alibaba.
Masa had already invested in Alibaba, and, you know, and Jack had one condition where he says, look, you know, I'm willing to sell 40% to Yahoo, but I want to be the highest valued private company in China, post money. So this is how, you know, came up with the $5 billion post.
It was $1 billion investment.
$1 billion cash, and then we put our assets in China into their business for whatever.
So $5 billion post to almost $400 billion post, not.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's interesting because as part of our $1 billion investment into Alibaba, which at that time was unheard of. I mean, it was risky for Yahoo, right? Because I think we had $3 billion on the balance sheet. So it's like a third of our balance sheet into, you know, what other people call crazy Jack, and so it was crazy on every scenario. But if you think about it, that $1 billion was taking out a bunch of existing Alibaba investors. Mm-hmm. So can you imagine some angel investor that, you know, put money at 20 million posts, and all of a sudden Yahoo comes and buy them out at 5 billion posts, right? So they think they made a huge amount of money, and a lot of them did. But the lesson is obviously the ride from 5 billion to 400 billion was even more impressive.
So what are there lessons for the founders in the room today who are mostly based here in the Valley or in the US? What can we learn from the Alibabas of the world? You're still on the board, we should say, so you still have some involvement in the business. What is there to learn from the Chinese ecosystem and these extraordinary success stories like Jack Ma? And what can we apply to our own businesses here?
Well, I think there are plenty of success stories here, and so but I think the advent of Jack and Pony at Tencent and you know, they were sort of the global entrepreneurs, right? That put China tech on the map. But I think what is interesting to observe is that, you know, in very much a cultural thing in China, you know, there's generations of entrepreneurs. So if Jack and Pony were sort of generation one, there's been generation 2 and 3 and probably the 4th generation. And there's a lot of respect and admiration from generation 2 to generation 1 and 3 to 2 and et cetera. They all want to kill each other, right? They all want to be I can be better than Jack, and I can be better than, So in many ways, you're seeing the acceleration of entrepreneurs that think they can one up the guys that came before them. It's many of you travel there. I mean, it's what you would expect. It's intense.
Your old VC, Mike Moritz, wrote an op-ed a few months ago saying Americans don't work hard enough. Go to China, you'll see what work ethic looks like. Do you agree?
It's a very. I agree on the startup sense, right? Like if you work for China Telecom, you're not going to be there. You're not going to do the 996 thing, right? So I also work with Didi, which is the rideshare company in China, and whenever I'm meeting with Cheng Wei, it's always, I mean, it's not always, sometimes I visit him during normal office hours, but he always wants to start a meeting at 11 p.m., right? That's when he's free, and he has a kid, and then he comes back to work the next day. So, I mean, he didn't have the kid, but, his wife had a kid, but it's just, to me, you go to these really tight-knit startup companies, it's like family, you're working with your brothers and sisters. So there's no, there's not it's not a clear divide between what is personal. I mean, everybody understands if you have personal issues at home, go home, don't show up, whatever. But there's no real. I mean, there's plenty to do at work. Meaning, like your life is at work, your social life is at work.
So when you invest in a company here in the States.
Well, it's just
Are you telling them like schedule 11 p.m.? Let's have a call at 11 p.m.?
No. I don't necessarily buy that you have to work like the Chinese to beat the Chinese. In fact, I would argue if you try to beat Chinese at their game, you're probably not going to beat them because A, we don't have as many people as they do, and B, culturally, that's just not how, so we have to figure out a way to work smarter and better, not more. But it is very intense there, and it is something that people see as a point of pride. We'll see. I mean, if 10 years, if they keep working like that, or I mean, a lot of this is still a generational thing, right? They're young, they're relatively. We'll see. I don't know. I would say that many of you, and certainly with Yahoo in the early days, and when we were late 20s, early 30s. We worked pretty hard. I mean, I don't remember going home very much. So,
let's transition to a couple more general topics. Jerry, you have a reputation of being a really nice guy. Can nice guys and gals win in business? Is it a strength or weakness? And I just contrast that to, say, Larry Ellison's reputation, not so nice a guy. How does your interpersonal approach and warmth and compassion, if true, how does that serve you or hinder you?
Well, I would say, first of all, it's totally irrelevant. But I remember when I became CEO, Steve Jobs called me and says, "Jerry, congratulations, but you're making a huge mistake." I'm like, "Why, Steve? You're too nice to be CEO, right?" And so his advice was, "Jerry, you have to take your management team, and every other one just fire him or her." and so how many VPs do you have? I have 300. Well, get rid of half, right? And then another mentor of sorts was Chuck Schwab, and Chuck calls and he's like, he's the nice guy, right? He is the one that says, you really have a chance of the culture. So there are many different ways to skin a cat, and but I would argue, Steve, during the time I met him and knew him, was one of the kindest, most generous mentors I had. Even Larry Ellison, in his own way, is very, very, he's you talk to people. I just met with somebody that worked for him. People are so loyal to him, and if you're not a nice guy, it doesn't compute. So I think there's a bit of a outward crust or persona or shell that people try to portray, and I'm not saying Larry's nice or Steve was nice, because they definitely can be nasty. But they're from that generation of people where being tough and being nasty was the way to win, right? And I think the Valley has evolved a lot. I don't really think about whether I'm nice or not. I just think about it as I just want to treat people like I would want to be treated. And so if I'm really nasty to somebody and then thinking that, if that's how they treated me, so I don't like that asymmetry, even though if you're in position of power or if you're well known, you can use that and get away with it. And I think a lot of people end up using that asymmetry and have a reputation of not being nice. But I don't think of it as that being nice or not nice. I just think about it as, if I'm nasty to somebody, I may have to see that person again. And if I don't remember I'm being nasty to them, then, it doesn't work, right? So it's just more of a balance thing for me.
So you're now helping run AME Cloud Ventures. And what's the investment thesis of the venture firm?
We don't have LP money, so it's whatever we want to do, which was a huge degree of freedom. Now of course my wife reminds me that she is the LP, but so I don't have as much freedom as I thought. But our idea was we had three founding principles. One is anything that looked and smelled like Yahoo we won't do. So we didn't do any consumer internet for a long time, and we still haven't done it much. The second was we wanted to do early stage, right? Trying to get to founders and entrepreneurs early in their life cycle.
And actually, just define that for folks in the room that might want to pitch the firm. Seed stage, Series A, Series B?
We do any stage for this room. But our preferred point of entry is ideally pre-A. A lot of times we're the first or second check-in. So, and the third real theme is data-driven businesses. So we were able to take advantage of a lot of the Hadoop outflow from Yahoo. There were a lot of data businesses that got built. And we just kind of followed the data to big data, to cloud, to mobility, to AI, to, as we talked about earlier, as sort of the data and digitization of biology. We've done a bunch of stuff in that space. But the idea is, have some deep science or deep tech, and then really pick the right entrepreneurs.
Blockchain? Long or short for you? What's the opportunity as you see it?
Well, so I wish I bought when Reed told me to buy, but I did buy, and I don't have as much as him. But and then
are you still buying?
I'm not buying. I bought Ethereum when it was in the low hundreds. But I think we're like everything else. The things that we're invested in are infrastructure to enable blockchain to be useful, right? Rather than the currency itself, and we'll see, right? This is not a short-term thing, I don't think.
You've ticked off some names of people who you've worked with in your career. I'm going to read a few names of folks, of people who I think you know.
This is a lightning round?
This is a lightning round. I'd love to hear what you learned from them or what you find impressive or inspiring about them. It can just be a few words or a phrase. And we'll start with some fellow Village LPs. Eric Schmidt.
Eric is... I think he is... What's the... You want a phrase?
Or what comes to mind? What's impressive about him?
I think he's deeply perceptive. He sees things. He doesn't always tell you what he sees, but he's very, very perceptive.
Herb Allen from Allen and Company.
Yes, Herb is deeply perceptive in a different way. He's like a quiet force. He's very, very quiet, but he has tremendous insights and ability to kind of make things happen behind the scenes.
Reid Hoffman.
I think he's one of our treasures. He's an American treasure. He's one of our best public intellectuals. He's not afraid to wade into anything, and I think his extremely courageous when what he's trying to do now and what he thinks he can accomplish with his ability to kind of get people to talk about important issues.
You're on the board of Workday. Anil Busri.
He's too good of a golfer. Anil, there are a few guys, few entrepreneurs, guys and ladies, but Anil is that stereotypical product CEO that it's second nature to him. When to flip from being a product person, when to flip to a CEO. I mean, he doesn't even realize it. And you watch him work, it's really, really incredible. I keep telling him he needs to write a book or he needs to teach somebody how he makes that decision, because he's had the advantage of being at Greylock and doing SaaS company investments, and he was a very successful investor. So he could toggle these multiple modes of operating, of being a technologist, of being a business person, an investor, better than anybody I've seen. I mean, sometimes in a 5-minute period he'll go through those phases, and it's incredible to watch.
Marissa Mayer.
I think she's brilliant. I didn't have anything to do with picking her at Yahoo, but I was very glad when she took the job, because I thought that's what Yahoo needed, was a product person. And I figured she had kind of the tailwind of Alibaba behind her, but ultimately I don't think, unfortunately I don't think she was able to pull Yahoo out of the trouble it was in.
Last but not least, your wife, Akiko. Noted philanthropist in the Bay Area.
Yeah. She's the boss. So in case this recording goes out in the public. No, when we met, and when you're able to marry somebody, and in my case we met and we're seriously dating before I started Yahoo. So she was there,
Wow.
from the beginning, right? To let me go do crazy things. And obviously she's my best friend and my trusted partner and everything else, and mother of dragons, and but all that good stuff.
Some other quick hitters. You wish you were in Toronto tonight.
Yes.
Unfortunately, you're here with all of us.
No. This is good. You guys are good.
Who's your pick? Warriors versus Raptors.
Warriors.
And if KD's healthy, should the Warriors play him?
Yeah.
Are the Warriors better with him or without him?
Oh yeah.
Better with him.
Look, I'm a small owner of the team, but I'm not speaking for the team. I mean, are you crazy? He's the best player on the planet.
In what ways are you trying to improve yourself in the coming months and years? Any self-improvement goals?
I find my current job as an investor, I feel like I'm getting worse at it and not better at it, and I want to figure out why. And part of it is that now I know what I know. That's actually getting in the way of when I didn't know stuff. I felt like I made better decisions. So I can't pretend I don't know what I know. So how do I work around it? That's what I'm working on.
Final question for me for now, so get ready to think of your questions in the audience. But Jerry, what's a book you frequently give as a gift or recommend to people? About business, life, spirituality.
Yeah, for a while I was I sent out a few copies of the AI Superpower. If you guys haven't read that, I think it's important to know the dynamic. The Kai-Fu's book. I have daughters, and there's a book that I gave Anil when he had his second daughter. Something about how to be a dad to daughters.
The title comes back to you. We'll come back to that.
Yeah.
Raise your hand for questions. Questions for Jerry. I'll start with Ashwin.
A couple threads that you've talked about here is with China, and you've got
Hold
a
the mic a little
reputation
closer.
of the ultimate globalist, and also with data. How do you? What's your advice to your portfolio companies about managing the privacy data future in these different ecosystems with the United States, with GDPR in Europe, and with data in China?
We sadly are looking at a lot of companies and investing in. I mean, they're great companies, but they're basically, we're splitting up the internet, right? And so the internet that we talked about 30 years ago versus today, we have internet for different sovereignties. We have Facebook's internet. We have Google's internet. We have, iOS and Android. I mean, the internet wasn't the Yahoo time anymore. So that's reality. That's a business opportunity. But it's also that we're going to have to build, as walls get built in the internet, there will be companies that help figure out these walls, right? So data governance and compliance is all of a sudden a huge business. In-country colos, I mean, remember, like, colo data centers were gone because cloud, and now all of a sudden, maybe you have to keep data where it's from. And if California decides to have its own privacy law, we have to store data. So all of a sudden, we went from everything going into the cloud in one platform. Now we're sort of fragmenting again. And there's businesses that are GDPR compliance is huge. Explainability, AI. How did that algorithm predict, whether to give you a loan or not? And someday, you have to explain how an algorithm decided on that. So it's not like it's pure innovation in the traditional sense. It's not like we've just invented a new chip to do new things. But these are software that I think are part of the new reality of a fragmented and more segmented world. And
next question, we'll go to Didi.
I'm Dida. I'm a friend of Village Global.
How does one become a friend of Village Global?
It's a very rigorous process.
Ask Ross. Lots of sort of foreign companies fail in China.
Yeah.
The reverse, though, we don't hear a ton about, right? So if you look at the next 10 years, what do you see in terms of Chinese companies expanding in the U.S., but also other markets that U.S. companies will be competing for?
Well, I mean, the way things are going, I don't think there are going to be too many Chinese companies here, which, I think on the whole is not great. But what I predict, and I should say this up front, I feel like the U.S.-China rift is like a 20-year rift. It's probably a technology Cold War in a way. Hopefully, as Cold Wars go, is as bad as it'll get. But and what I mean by that is we talk about their data and their privacy and their internet. This 5G war, which is an infrastructure war, and then as with tariffs or not, I think they're going to start to want to build their own supply chain capability, from chips up, and we're going to want to diversify our supply chain away from dependence on China. So you're going to have this splitting of the world where we spent 30 years building it. So having said that, I think when superpowers fight, they try not to fight on their home turf, right? So that it'll be proxy fights. Whether it's the Belt Road Initiative for China or our current president doesn't believe in alliances, but at some point you'll have to find friends. And my prediction is, Chinese companies are not going to try to come to the U.S. and bang their heads against the wall. That's crazy. But it'll probably be in Southeast Asia. It'll probably be in Europe in some respects. And that's probably where the first war Amazon will fight with Alibaba probably will be India, right? I mean, so you can kind of start seeing these proxy wars being fought outside of the two countries. And it'll be interesting, and who knows?
Next question, we'll go to Sarah in the front, and then one on the back.
Hi, I'm Sarah Deshpande. I'm an investor with Maven Ventures. You mentioned you aren't doing much investing on kind of the consumer internet side. You just maybe know too much for that. No. But I do. I mean, I have to believe there will be major billion-dollar successes for consumers, software that they use in their everyday daily lives. I'm curious if there are kind of unmet needs or big areas of opportunity you do still see for consumer software.
Obviously part of it was joking. I think I'm too old Like if somebody, I was talking to Jeremy Liu, and I was like, how the hell, I mean, if somebody showed me a messenger that messages disappear and, why the hell would you invest in that, right? And so the instinct, so there's two things. One is if you're an early stage investor, you have to invest in a ton of consumer startups because their failure, the death rate is very, very high. And there's no real downside protection because there's usually, 25-year-old making an app, right? But, and the second thing is, I think the volume game doesn't really work for early stage, for people like me because we just we don't see and know and but I think, and third, I think it is a bit of the current times, right? I mean, Apple and Android dominating the ecosystem, Facebook and to some respect Google. It's very hard. I mean, it's very hard to develop consumer apps that have huge upside now. That time may come. It will change because these are cycles. I think I personally think, going back to our earlier conversation, I think privacy is going to be a killer app to the extent that you can figure out a way to look. If you live in a Western society, if you live in the United States, China, you go to China, you basically give up all your privacy. You're going to get surveyed. They're going to know that you stopped at the airport. You're going to show up at the hotel. They know everything, right? In the U.S., there's benefits of some surveillance, right? Like if I walk into a mall and they know my delivery, whatever. So if there's a way of dialing up and down your privacy preference dynamically to take advantage of the great things that you can do with AI, but not lose your privacy, obviously that's a huge. I think it's a huge advantage for our way of life. But if we don't solve that, then China's going to have way more data than we do, and because they don't really care. So I think that's a key. I'm not saying it well because I really haven't thought about it long, but I feel like if we can figure out a way to really create a dial for our privacy as consumers, it'll be I think it'll really be a killer app.
Last question from the audience, then I'll ask the last one. Let's go to Henry.
Just maybe
introduce yourself, Henry.
Yeah. So your thoughts on, I guess, companies now? There's a lot of venture capital money. Companies can stay private for much, much longer versus the era when you guys went public, and companies very successful went public, like Amazon at $15 million in revenue, probably something like that. For example, just your thoughts on the climate change in 20 years.
I mean, I don't know if you. I don't think we got into this, but we started the company. We incorporated the company Yahoo at March 2nd of 1995. We went public in April of 1996. Okay. Our S1 had $1 million in revenue, right? And so I would argue we went public way too soon, but that was the only way to get a war chest because everybody else was building war chests, right? So now you're getting all these people saying maybe Uber went to public too late or whatever. But I think there are I think there are some good things of going public. There's obviously a lot of bad things about going public, especially with the current investor environment. But my advice to my entrepreneurs, Eric Yuan just went public with Zoom.
One of your investments, right?
One of our investments, and I try to talk him out of it. But I think ultimately, if you go in with your eyes wide open, right, and you take as much advice as you can from people, and there's plenty of people who can tell you guys what it's like to be public and what pitfalls to avoid. We'll see. I mean, Eric is newly public, but I think if you go in with your eyes open and your expectations set, it could be a very powerful tool. And in Zoom's case, it helps the brand, it helps the visibility. And in Yahoo's case, that was a big argument to say, hey, now you've arrived, right? You're not some fly-by-night kind of thing. So
Jared, one final question.
Yeah.
In our tradition with our conversations with luminaries like yourself, we're called Village because no founder can change the world on his or her own. It requires a village around you to realize your full potential. Who is somebody in your village in your greater network, in your team, in your family that's been instrumental to your success, and how so?
Well, we've already rattled off my wife and a few mentors. I think in my old age I'm getting a little nostalgic, but you know, I used to, you know, this is, I think it was 10 years since Steve Jobs passed, but you know, we used to walk in the streets of Palo Alto together, right, Waverly, and there's hundreds of people walking with us, I mean, not with us, but just walking around the town of Palo Alto, and it never leaks, right? So Steve has this magic power of, you know, I'm walking down the street with Jerry Yang, yes, you know, and but Steve, you know, I would say Steve had both, you know, and then the other person that I think in a very different way was Andy Grove, and Andy, I think, just was tough as nails and was a man of a few words, but when he spoke, you like really, you know, your brain hurts trying to listen to him because he almost speaks in code. You know, he tries, you know, it's like a little bit like Yoda. But those are different people that I think, for me, and then I think we have living legends. I mean, like we talked about Chuck before, but Chuck, to me,
Charles Schwab.
Charles Schwab is so wise. He's got that folksy, homey kind of thing, but he has seen, you know, I just love storytellers like him.
Jerry Yang, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks, guys.
If you're an early stage entrepreneur, we'd love to hear from you. Please hit us up at villageglobal.vc/networkcatalyst.